Judges chapter 9 tonight. It's going to be a long chapter, so we're going to cover one chapter tonight. And this is on the judge named Abimelech. You've heard of Abimelech before. It's kind of a mouthful. So Abimelech is one of Gideon's sons, who, if you've been coming, is now the sixth judge recorded in the book of Judges. And so I want you to remember these judges. They are warriors raised up in the different tribes to deliver the tribes of Israel from their enemies. In those days, remember, there was no king. That is, there was no man king, because God was to be Israel's king. Therefore, after Joshua left the scene, Israel went into a period where God was to rule and reign in Israel and in the lives of the people. God was to be their king, ruling and reigning over a theocratic nation, a nation governed by God. But we've seen in these first handful of judges that this was a generation who did not know the Lord, nor the work he had done for Israel. Judges chapter 2, verse 10. It was a generation who knew not war. Judges chapter 3, verse 2. And therefore, they got very lax. Everything was handed to them. And so they started to fall into idolatry. And the result was this downward decline. And when the Lord would cause a certain tribe to experience defeat because of this decline from their enemies, because of their idolatry, they would cry out to the Lord for mercy, and then the Lord would raise up a judge to deliver them from that calamity. And so that was the cycle that we've been in. And so now Judges chapters 6, 7, and 8 was the account of the judge Gideon. And then in chapter 9, we're going to read tonight, is the account of one of Gideon's sons, which is this man named Abimelech. Now, as we begin to read Judges chapter 9, I want you to note that in chapter 9, Gideon is referred to by the name Yerubbaal. Okay, so don't get mixed up. Every time you see Yerubbaal, that's actually Gideon. Okay, and throughout Judges chapter 9, that's going to be how he's referred to. And that name came from Judges chapter 6, verse 32, if you're keeping notes, when Gideon destroyed the altar of Baal. When you read that account, it says the name Yerubbaal thus was a mockery of the god Baal, and that it meant let Baal plead for himself. But this underscored the idolatry that was going on in Israel, and particularly in the tribe of Manasseh, where Gideon was from. And so when Gideon was called to take down all those altars there, what he did was, as he took that down, he was given that name, Yerubbaal, which means, oh, let God or let Baal plead for himself. And so that was the name. And so that's the name that he's referred to in chapter 9. Okay, so every time you see Yerubbaal, it's actually Gideon. Okay, all right, so we're going to start to read right from verse 1 of chapter 9. It says, then Abimelech, the son of Yerubbaal, which is who?
Gideon.
That would be Gideon, okay? Went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, please, verse 2, speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Yerubbaal, or Gideon, reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. So remember that Gideon had many wives, and that's recorded in Judges chapter 8, verse 30. And he had 70 sons through those many wives, one of whom was Abimelech, through his concubine from Shechem. Judges chapter 8, verse 31. Therefore, Abimelech, wanting control, total control, not wanting to share with his half-brothers, he comes up with a plan with his mother's brothers, which would be what? His uncles on his mother's side, to kill all his half-brothers from Gideon's other wives. That's the plan. Okay? So verse 2, again, says, please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Gideon, or Yerubbaal, reign over you, or that one reign over you. And so he says, wouldn't you rather have just me reign over you, rather than all of the other sons? And so that's the question that he poses. Now, what's he want to do? He wants to be king, doesn't he? But we know that in that day there was no king. God was supposed to be the king. So verse 2 says, remember that I am your own flesh and bone. I'm from, really, Shechem. My mother, one of the many wives of Jerubbaal, or Gideon, one of the many wives of Gideon, my mother is your mother. It's your flesh and bones. Okay, so I'm of you. So he says, make me king. And the ploy is going to be to do away with all the other brothers, half-brothers. Okay? Now, verse 3 says, and his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. Verse 4, so they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Now, verse 5, then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers. That would be his half-brothers from Gideon, or from Jerubbaal, from his other wives. The 70 sons of Jerubbaal on one stone. He killed them all. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left. He escaped because he hid himself. Now, verse 6. And all the men of Shechem gathered together of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. Now, that is interesting, isn't it? What's interesting? Well, here's that he's made king. Who was to be king during this time? God. God was to be their king. And even Gideon emphasized this after he defeated the Midianites. I don't even remember that. The people wanted to make Gideon king after the victory over the Midianites. But remember what Gideon's response was. I'm going to read this to you. Judges chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. We read this last week. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. Chapter 8, verse 23. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. And Judges 8, verse 24 gives us insight into the reason why. If you want to read that in your own time again, it's because Gideon, like all men, are fallible. Just the next verse after Gideon said that, verse 24, chapter 8 records this, that Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you that each of you would give me the earrings from his plunder. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And then further down, you can read and we can see that Gideon made that into an idol. It underscores a very important principle. You know what that is? That you and I are fallible. Man is fallible. That all men and all women and all leaders are fallible. And that is why we need to have, who is king? God. The only infallible king ruling and reigning in our lives is the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we see here in our chapter this evening that very simple principle underscored. God needs to be our king. But it's usually the case that man wants to be king. That people want to rule and reign their own lives. I'm the king of my own life. Really? How's your life going without Jesus? All right, so verse 6 again. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king. Big mistake. Beside the terebinth tree, at the pillar that was in Shechem. And let me just share with you before we go on. Never make any person king. Respect people. But look to the Lord as your king, always. Verse 7. Now when they told Jotham, this would be the youngest one that survived, that hid himself, he went and stood up on Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out. And he said to them, so Jotham, Gideon's youngest son from another of Gideon's wives, he uses Mount Gerizim as sort of a pulpit. He's standing up there on this platform, And he begins to preach this fable. I want you to listen to this fable. Verse 7 says, "Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.'" Verse 9. "But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and man, and go to sway over other trees?'" Verse 10. "Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees?' Verse 12. Then the tree said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Should I cease my new wine, with which cheers both God and man, and go to sway over trees?'" I want you to notice the succession of trees here. The olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine. They were valued highly in Palestine. And so the sequence is a digression all the way to what we're going to read next, the bramble. How many know what a bramble is? It's not a tree, it's a shrub. A very sharp one at that, with thorns. And it's a clear reference to who? Abimelech. It is no doubt an affront on Abimelech. And so verse 14 says, "Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'" And so the bramble's offer of shade is a reference to Abimelech's offer to be their king, their covering. And it's a traditional role as a king to cover its people. But the problem is that in that day, there was no king, no man king. At least there shouldn't have been, because God was to be their king. And so you can probably guess what's going to happen. But you know, that's a lesson that I think we all need to learn. I mentioned it earlier. When we come out from under the covering of God and His Word, and we look to people, chances are we're headed for trouble. If what people say is in conflict with what God says, then we need to listen to God. We see it in time and time again. We see it over and over again. It's recorded in Scripture, and for some of us, we can see it time and time again in our own personal lives. Oftentimes we listen to the world before we listen to God. We come under the covering of the world's counsel before we come under the covering of God's counsel. You see, come under the covering of God's Word, and you don't push it aside, then you're going to be okay. But if you come out from the covering of God's Word and you start to go outside of God's covering, then you're going to get hurt. And that's the lesson that we see here. Now, verse 16, "Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves," verse 17, "for my father," this is Jotham saying, "my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian." Verse 18, "But you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech the son of his female servant king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother." Verse 19, "If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But," verse 20, "if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech." So God's going to determine the outcome. That's what he's saying. "And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother." And so you can probably guess what's going to happen. Who's going to win? I know this surprises you, but God always wins. Doesn't seem like it sometimes. We look at our situation, oh God, I got to maybe cut some corners here. I can't trust God, can't trust His Word, I'm losing. Got news for you. God never loses. God always wins. You just want to hang tight with God's plan. When you see someone coming out from under God's covering, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what's going to happen. And so the question is, why do we do it? I mean, you see it coming, right? A fall when you come out from under God's covering. You kind of know what's coming. But that's the deception of sin, isn't it? Sin makes you do some foolish things. And as you sin, the desire to sin is even greater and easier to do. You know better, but for some reason you think you can get away with it this time. And so you try it again. But when we sin, we come out from under God's covering. You know, I know, I better not go there. But then we go there anyway. And when we do, what do you think is waiting for you? What do you think is waiting for you when you come out from God's covering? That's the devil. He wants to take you apart. He's just waiting for you to come out from the covering of God so he can devour you. And that's really what we see going on here. And Jotham revealed this in the preaching of this fable. God warns us. He is faithful to caution us in his word. But so often we ignore the warning. I think I've done it a few times. And I think you've done it a few times. So we need to take heed to the warning and stay under God's covering. We need to know his word and stay under the covering of his word. Now, verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And so I want you to notice that. Who sent the spirit of ill will? God did. But 3 years, it would seem, hey, Abimelech, he kind of pulled it off. You ever feel like that? Hey, I kind of pulled it off. I'm doing this. I'm in this sin, and I'm kind of getting away with it. Pulled it off. Got to tell you, God's not going to be mocked. You know what you have to consider? That's a time of mercy. He's merciful that he doesn't judge you, and he wants you to come to your senses. And so after 3 years, notice God is the one that sent this spirit of ill will. God is the one orchestrating everything. God's not going to be mocked. He's the one in control. And it says the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. Verse 24, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem who aided him in the killing of his brother. See, God will bring about justice. And I know, oftentimes, things aren't fair in this life. That's the truth of the matter, isn't it? That's the reality of living in a fallen world. However, we can know that in the end, true justice is going to be met out. And so we need to always keep looking to the Lord, looking upward and forward, and trusting God for his sovereign plan to bring about true justice. But I got to tell you, true justice is never going to be found in this world. And if you're looking for it, I got to tell you, you're going to be wanting. True justice is never going to be found in this world. It's a fallen world. Until the Lord returns, there's going to be a lot of unfairness because of sin. True justice is not always in this place, but we can hold on to our future hope while in this place and know that justice is going to be rendered out when Jesus returns. That's our sure hope. And we must learn to live by faith in that future hope. And that will get us through the injustices of today. In this life of faith, we need to keep our eyes on God. If you look to this world for justice, you're going to be very, very disappointed. We look to God. He's our hope. Verse 25. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains. And they robbed all who passed by them along that way. And it was told Abimelech. Verse 26. Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem. And the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. And I just marvel at this. Notice the turn. Now God is behind it. But really, it's what we see in the world all the time. It's the change. One day they're for you. And the next day they're against you. Notice that? Notice how, as quickly as they followed Abimelech, they turned on him. Not that he's worthy to be followed, but take note of how fast worldly people change. One day they're for you, and the next day they're against you. One day they're behind Abimelech, and the next day they want to kill him. Isn't that interesting? And it just goes to show how wishy-washy the world is. They have no conviction to principle, only to what serves them. If it benefits them, they're for you. But if not, they're against you. It's the way of the world, but not for the child of God. As children of the living God, we're called to be principled in God and principled in His Word. Faithful and unchanging, unbending, always under God's covering, always following what God tells us to do. Now, verse 27. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went out into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Verse 28. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech? And who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, which is Gideon, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Verse 29. If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. So he said to Abimelech, Increase your army and come out. Then Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed. His anger was aroused. Verse 31, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are, fortifying the city against you. Verse 32, Now therefore get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush up upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity. Verse 34. And so Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. Verse 36. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. Verse 37. So Gaal spoke again and said, See, people are coming down from the center of the land. And another company is coming from the diviners, terebinth tree. Verse 30, Then Zebul said to him, Where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out if you will fight. Go out if you will and fight with them now. Verse 39, So Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Verse 41. Then Abimelech dwelt in Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers, so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Verse 44. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sold it with salt. Verse 46. Now when the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god of Berith. Verse 47, and it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, what you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done. Verse 49, so each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. So this is interesting. Think about it. At this point, it looks like Abimelech is victorious, doesn't he? And so at this point, one would conclude by Jotham's fable that Abimelech acted in truth and sincerity with his father, Jerubbaal, and with his house by getting rid of his half-brothers and making himself king. It would seem that that was the case at this point, because we see Abimelech being victorious. But you want to keep reading. And I want to draw this to your attention, because oftentimes the world thinks that just because I'm experiencing a little bit of success, they think that, you know what? I've gotten away with it. But God is not going to be mocked. You have to keep reading. And I got to tell you, at the end of the day, no one gets away with anything. You might think you do. I mean, I've seen it personally. The day you breathe your last, you're going to come clean with the Lord. You're going to come clean. I'm going to come clean. No one's going to fool God. The day we breathe our last, here and go on into eternity, the truth will be meted out. No one's going to fool God. So let's keep reading. Verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the roof of the tower. Verse 52. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it. And he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. Verse 50. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed me. See, that was the lowest. To be thought of as a king and a warrior, and then you were killed by a woman. And so, just at the point he thinks he's victorious, what does God do? God takes him out by the hand of a woman. So his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his own place. Very interesting. So who has the last word? God always has the last word. You might not think he does when things aren't going the way you think they should. But you give it to God. God knows what he's doing. He knows the days ahead. He's going to meet and sort everything out. And so it seems to me that the reason why God allowed Abimelech to win the battle up to this point was to make sure everyone knew that when Abimelech was defeated, that God defeated him with the hand of a woman. That without a doubt, everyone would know that God was the one that brought Abimelech down. God will not be mocked. He's not going to be fooled. He knows the beginning from the end. His plan is going to go forward. And I think the lesson for us is a similar one, that at any time we try to be our own king, God will humble us and bring us to a place to recognize that He alone is king. That He is the one true living God. That He's king. He's the king that needs to be ruling and reigning our lives. And here with Abimelech, the lesson is highlighted in bold, isn't it? That God desires to rule and reign Israel. And that's always been His desire, and always will be. God wants to rule and reign in Israel. Then one day He will. But it's the same for us. His desire is to rule and reign in our lives. The question is, will you and I let Him? Now some might ask, well, what about the time of the kings in Israel, when Saul and David and Solomon reigned as king? Well, that's true, but it certainly wasn't God's best, was it? There were man kings, but the reason that was is because God, in His mercy, He allowed them what they wanted. He allowed them to have what they wanted. But when you look at history and you go down from those kings to the divided kingdom, what did it show you? That man cannot rule and reign his own life. They ended up in exile. Wasn't the best time in Israel, the divided kingdom. That period actually led them out of the land. God only allowed them to have a man king because that's what they desired. And that's a warning to us as well. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen is God would allow you to receive what you want. You ever see that applied out? You see somebody's life, what they're asking for, what they want, and then when you see them get it, you say, oh no, that's the worst thing. They're not going to be able to handle it. And so we have to be looking to God's best. A man king wasn't the best plan, but God in His mercy allowed them a man king. He allowed them a choice, didn't He? And they chose second, third, and even the last best. If there's a thing such as that, the last best, it's kind of a contradiction of terms. But when you look at Israel, that's actually what they did. They thought they were choosing the best, but that was the last thing that they ought to choose. You look at the history of the divided kingdom. Not too many good kings, huh? God allowed them to choose. But they chose wrongly almost every time. And so they ended up being expelled from the land. And so the application, I think, is well for us as in the same manner. It's the same kind of application. We too can choose second, third, fourth, and even the last best. And sometimes we do. And then God allows us. He loves us, but He doesn't force us to follow Him. He allows you and I to choose. And so the great lesson, I think, for us to hold is to follow the Lord and to choose rightly. Allow the Lord to rule and reign your life. And maybe that means not giving you what you want. Because maybe it's because we can't handle what we want. Verse 56. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Yerubbaal. So once again, God's word and God's way prevails, doesn't it? And in God's time. And I'm just thinking, will we ever learn that valuable lesson? It's God's will, God's way, and in God's time. Hopefully we'll learn that, and we'll be good with that on this side of heaven. God gives us his will. God gives us a way to accomplish his will. And in his time, he's going to bring to pass that plan, if we would just wait on it. I just want to thank you for your word tonight. Help us, I pray, to apply these scriptures to our own lives. Your will, your way, your timing. Help us to allow you to be king in our own lives. Lord, we have your word that directs us. We have the Holy Spirit that leads and guides us and gives us understanding. I do believe that it's very clear the way to go and what your will is and to wait for it. I believe it's very clear. Help us, I pray, to follow, to allow you to rule and reign, to continue to remain under your covering. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Shall we